April 7th, 2026, 11:43 local time. The South China Sea, approximately 210 nautical miles west-northwest of the Philippine island of Luzon. The sky is clear and bone white, the kind of visibility that makes everything look deceptively simple. A U.S. carrier strike group is holding station in international waters, conducting what the official operations order calls a freedom of navigation exercise. 11 ships arranged across 35 nautical miles of open ocean. At the center of the formation, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the largest warship in the history of naval warfare, is turning into the wind to recover a flight of F/A-18E Super Hornets, returning from a routine combat air patrol over the Spratly Islands. The air is full of radio traffic. The sea is calm, and 1,480 kilometers to the northwest, in a hardened underground launch facility carved into a hillside 60 kilometers south of Chengdu, a PLA Rocket Force crew is completing the final arming sequence on a DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile. Welcome. I'm your host at Navy Legends. Tonight we're running a scenario that sits at the absolute frontier of modern naval warfare. A near-future engagement that confronts the deepest structural vulnerability in American carrier strike doctrine. This is a fictional simulation. The weapons are real. The tactical logic is real. What we are examining is a question that U.S. Navy planners have been wrestling with, quietly and urgently, for more than a decade. What happens when the carrier, the crown jewel of American power projection, is actually targeted by a weapon designed specifically to kill it? Let's go back to April 7th. The context matters. Tensions over Taiwan have been building since February, when Beijing announced a 60-day suspension of all civilian air traffic in a broad corridor of the Taiwan Strait, citing unspecified military exercise requirements. The suspension was unprecedented. The U.S. Pacific Fleet responded by repositioning 2 carrier strike groups to the Western Pacific, one to the Philippine Sea, one to this position in the South China Sea. The message was deliberate. The presence was a signal. Beijing read the signal, and Beijing had been preparing a signal of its own. The DF-21D, NATO reporting name, CSS-5 Mod 5, is a road-mobile medium-range ballistic missile with a maneuvering reentry vehicle warhead. It has a claimed range of 1,500 kilometers and a terminal dive velocity of approximately Mach 10 in its final descent phase. Its warhead, a kinetic penetrator combined with a shaped charge behind a hardened nose cone, is specifically designed to penetrate the armored flight deck of a Nimitz or Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier. The U.S. military has been tracking the DF-21D's development since 2009. It has never been fired in combat. Until today. But the DF-21D is only part of the picture. And the part everyone expects is never the part that kills you. At 11:31 local time, 12 minutes before our timestamp, a Type 055 Renhai-class cruiser of the People's Liberation Army Navy, operating under a cover designation as a scientific survey vessel, transmitted a brief 4-second burst of encrypted data from a position 380 kilometers northwest of the carrier strike group. The burst was a targeting update. Real-time position, course, and speed data for the carrier, derived from 2 separate satellite observation passes in the preceding 40 minutes, cross-referenced with over-the-horizon radar emissions from a shore-based HFO-TH radar array in Fujian Province. The carrier strike group's electronic surveillance team flagged the transmission at 11:32. It was logged. A query was sent up the chain to 7th Fleet. An acknowledgement was returned at 11:38, 5 minutes before our timestamp, noting the transmission and instructing the strike group to maintain alert posture. No additional action was directed. That 5-minute window closed at 11:43. At 11:43, the PLA Rocket Force crew completed their launch sequence. At 11:43:11, a DF-21D left its transporter erector launcher on a trajectory that would carry it to an apogee of approximately 1,000 kilometers before its reentry vehicle separated and began its terminal dive. At 11:43:18, 7 seconds later, a second DF-21D launched from a mobile launcher 340 kilometers north of the first site. Simultaneously, And this is the part the engagement planners had not fully modeled. 3. CJ-100 ground-launched cruise missiles, launched from a position on Woody Island in the Paracel chain, 470 kilometers to the west. The CJ-100 is a supersonic cruise missile. Mach 4 cruise speed, 900-kilometer range. Sea skimming profile in its terminal phase. Its radar cross-section is approximately 0.01 square meters. At the edge of reliable detection range for the SPY-6 radar system aboard the carrier's escort destroyers. The attack architecture was 3-layered and simultaneous. 2 ballistic missiles on steep re-entry trajectories. 3 supersonic cruise missiles on sea skimming approach. All timed to arrive within a 90-second engagement window. The SPY-6 air and missile defense radar aboard the strike group's lead, Arleigh Burke. Flight 3 destroyer, the most capable shipboard radar ever deployed by the United States Navy. Acquired the 2 ballistic tracks at 11:45:22, when both re-entry vehicles had separated from their boost vehicles and were descending through 280,000 meters at Mach 8.7. The tactical picture in the Combat Information Center came alive immediately. Bullseye, bullseye. 2 inbound ballistic tracks. Grid reference Foxtrot 7. Assess DF series re-entry vehicles. Time to terminal phase. 9 minutes, 40 seconds. 9 minutes and 40 seconds sounds like a long time. It is not a long time. The strike group's Aegis engagement authority was with the lead destroyer's tactical action officer. Under current Pacific Fleet standing orders, engagement of inbound ballistic threats did not require separate authorization from the carrier. The tactical action officer had autonomous engagement authority for ballistic missile defense. She exercised it at 11:45:31, 9 seconds after first detection. 2. SM-3, Block 2. A interceptors left the destroyers VLS. 2 more followed from a second Arleigh Burke, 18 nautical miles to the southwest. 4 interceptors total, 2 assigned to each inbound track, fired in rapid 2-shot salvo sequence. The SPY-6 system aboard the lead destroyer simultaneously began searching for additional threats. At 11:46:09, 47 seconds after the ballistic tracks appeared, it acquired the first CJ-100 cruise missile at a range of 68 nautical miles, bearing 278 degrees, altitude 12 meters, speed Mach 4.1. The tactical action officer had 4 SM-3s already airborne, chasing 2 ballistic targets. She now had 3 inbound cruise missiles requiring immediate engagement. She called it immediately. 2 SM-6 on the cruise tracks. Alert phalanx. Weapons free on the cruise missile engagement. The SM-6, the Extended Range Active Standard Missile, is the U.S. Navy's primary long-range anti-air warfare interceptor. With a range exceeding 240 nautical miles in ballistic intercept mode and active radar homing in its terminal phase, it is effective against both cruise missiles and ballistic threats. Against a Mach 4 sea skimmer with a 0.01 square meter radar cross-section at 68 nautical miles, the engagement solution was demanding but within parameters. At 11:46:22, 2 SM-6 missiles cleared the destroyer's VLS, climbing to altitude before arcing downward toward the computed intercept points on the CJ-100 tracks. The carrier had been alerted. Its commanding admiral, observing the engagement picture from the carrier's Combat Direction Center, was simultaneously managing the recovery of 4 FA-18s still in the landing pattern. The decision to clear the flight deck, to abort the recovery, disperse the aircraft, and clear personnel from topside stations was made at 11:46:30. It was the right call, made quickly. It may have saved several hundred lives. At 11:48:14, the first SM-3 Block 2A reached its computed intercept point for Raid Bravo 1, the first DF-21D re-entry vehicle, now descending through 110,000 meters at Mach 9.4. The SM-3's kill vehicle achieved radar lock at a range of 3.1 kilometers and executed a terminal correction maneuver. The intercept was clean. The DF-21D re-entry vehicle was struck directly by the kinetic kill vehicle at a closing velocity of approximately 4.2 kilometers per second. The reentry vehicle fragmented at 108,000 meters altitude over open water. Debris scattered across a fall zone 60 kilometers northwest of the strike group. Raid Bravo 1 destroyed. The second SM-3, assigned as backup on the same track, had a clean deconfliction and was redirected by the Aegis system toward Raid Bravo 2, a dynamic retargeting maneuver that the Aegis baseline 9.C software had been upgraded to execute in 2024. The SM-3 from the second destroyer also engaged Raid Bravo 2, two interceptors on the second ballistic target. At 11:48:41, both SM-3s engaged Raid Bravo 2 simultaneously. The first achieved a direct hit at 93,000 meters. The second detonated within 4 meters of the fragmenting debris field. Raid Bravo 2 was eliminated. Both ballistic threats were dead. The engagement had worked as designed. The investment, the years of development, the $27 million per interceptor, the integrated battle management software, the training had performed. But the cruise missiles had not stopped moving. At 11:48:52, the first SM-6 intercepted CJ-100 Contact 1 at a range of 31 nautical miles from the strike group. Direct hit. The cruise missile detonated in a fireball that briefly appeared on the carrier's bridge radar repeater as a new contact before dissipating. At 11:49:07, the second SM-6 engaged CJ-100 Contact 2. The SM-6's active radar seeker tracked the target through its Mach 4 sea-skimming profile and detonated 2.1 meters from the missile's airframe. The proximity burst shredded the CJ-100's intake and right wing section. The missile tumbled and impacted the ocean 27 nautical miles west of the formation at 11:49:11. 2 cruise missiles down, 1 remaining. CJ-100 Contact 3 had done something unexpected. At approximately 11:46:50, while the SM-6s were being launched, the third CJ-100 had executed a pre-programmed lateral course change of 34 degrees, swinging from a bearing of 278 degrees to a bearing of 244 degrees. It was still inbound, but it had shifted its approach axis by more than 30 degrees, moving outside the optimized intercept corridor of the first SM-6 engagement geometry. The Aegis system had detected the maneuver and immediately recalculated. A third SM-6 left the VLS at 11:47:14. The new intercept geometry was tighter. The SM-6's terminal homing radar acquired the maneuvering CJ-100 at 11 nautical miles. The missile corrected. It detonated 1.4 meters from the CJ-100's fuselage at a range of 19 nautical miles from the carrier's hull. The CJ-100's warhead section, a 300-kilogram high-explosive penetrator, separated from the destroyed airframe. On momentum alone, it continued forward at declining velocity. At 19 nautical miles, it was traveling at approximately Mach 2.8. It was no longer a guided weapon. It was a ballistic fragment. It impacted the ocean 6 nautical miles from the carrier's port beam. The carrier was not struck. By any reasonable measure, the engagement was a success. Both ballistic missiles intercepted. All 3 cruise missiles neutralized. The formation remained intact. The carrier remained operational. But the after-action analysis would reveal several things that are not in the official press release. The Aegis system had expended 4 SM-3 Block 2A interceptors, 3 SM-6 missiles, and committed 14% of one destroyer's VLS capacity in a single 6-minute engagement window. Against a 2-layer attack, the PLA Rocket Force has an estimated inventory of 80 to 120 DF-21D missiles in active service. A sustained saturation attack, 8 to 12 simultaneous inbound ballistic tracks paired with 12 to 18 simultaneous cruise missiles, would exhaust the defensive capacity of any realistic carrier strike group configuration within 2 to 3 engagement cycles. The math is not comfortable. The carrier's commanding admiral submitted his after-action report to 7th Fleet at 14:30 on April 7th. It was classified at the top secret/SCI level. Paragraph 7 of that report, as reconstructed from multiple sourced accounts in this simulation, read approximately as follows. The engagement outcome was favorable. The threat architecture employed by adversary forces on this date was consistent with available intelligence assessments. However, the engagement modeling indicates that our current defensive layering is optimized for single-axis, limited salvo attacks. A coordinated multi-axis salvo of 12 or more simultaneous inbound tracks would create weapons allocation conflicts within the Aegis engagement sequencing software that cannot be resolved within existing doctrine. The survivability of the carrier in that scenario cannot be guaranteed. He sent that paragraph to 7th Fleet at 1430. At 2100, a formal diplomatic protest was transmitted by the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, characterizing the launch as an unprovoked act of military aggression against a U.S. naval formation in international waters. The note demanded immediate explanation and cessation. At 2345, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded. The response acknowledged that PLA Rocket Force and PLA Navy assets had conducted a routine live-fire exercise in the South China Sea on April 7th, in full compliance with international maritime law, within China's self-declared air defense identification zone. The response expressed regret that the proximity of U.S. naval forces to the exercise area had created unnecessary tension, and suggested that the United States consider observing greater restraint in its freedom of navigation operations within what Beijing termed China's sovereign maritime space. The word sovereign was not accidental. Beijing had fired 2 carrier-killer ballistic missiles and 3 supersonic cruise missiles at a U.S. carrier strike group in broad daylight. It had framed the attack as a scheduled exercise. It was daring Washington to call it an act of war. Washington did not call it an act of war. The National Security Council met at 7 a.m. the following morning, April 8th. The intelligence community's assessment, delivered by the Director of National Intelligence, characterized the attack as a deliberate escalatory probe, designed to test both the technical performance of PLA strike systems and the American political response threshold. The assessment concluded that Beijing had calibrated the attack to remain below the threshold that would compel a kinetic U.S. response, while demonstrating that the carrier was not, in fact, invulnerable. The carrier strike group remained on station for 36 more hours. Then it repositioned 200 nautical miles to the east, still in international waters, technically, placing greater distance between the formation and the Chinese mainland's strike envelope. The repositioning was not announced. It was not described as a withdrawal. In every official statement, it was described as a routine operational movement. Beijing noticed. Beijing said nothing publicly. In private channels, Chinese military attachés in 3 separate allied capitals conveyed the same message in slightly varied language over the following 72 hours. China had demonstrated the capability. China had chosen restraint. The question of whether China would choose restraint a second time was now a matter for the United States to consider carefully. This is the world that Navy Legends exists to analyze, where the most important engagements are the ones where nobody officially admits what happened, where the weapons fired are acknowledged as exercises, where the reposition is called routine, where the after-action paragraph about carrier survivability sits classified at levels that ensure the people making the relevant budget decisions will never read it. The carrier strike group is the irreplaceable instrument of American power projection. It is the argument that makes other arguments unnecessary. When a president says, "I am dispatching a carrier strike group to the region," every government in the world understands the vocabulary. But the carrier is also a 100,000-ton target. It moves at a maximum speed of 30 knots. It needs open ocean to operate. And 40 years of Chinese strategic investment, the DF-21D, the DF-26 Guam killer, the YJ-18 submarine-launched cruise missile, the Type 055 cruiser, the networked targeting architecture that ties all of it together, has been aimed at one strategic objective: making the argument that the carrier represents too dangerous to make. The question April 7th posed is not whether the U.S. Navy won the engagement. It did. The question is whether winning a 2-missile test counts as evidence that the doctrine holds against a 12-missile reality. The engineers in Chengdu are watching the same intercept data the U.S. Navy is. They know what was expended. They know what the reload cycle looks like. They know the math. and they have more missiles than we have interceptors. That is not a counsel of despair. It is a design requirement. It is a funding argument. It is the reason that the Navy's Next Generation Laser Weapons Program, the Directed Energy Maritime Systems Program, and the improvements to the Cooperative Engagement Capability Network are not abstract research projects. They are the answer to a specific equation that April 7th made unmistakably clear. The carrier survived. That matters. The gap between survival and certainty of survival is where the next war will be decided. Not in the engagement itself, but in the procurement cycles, the wargaming results, and the classified paragraphs that too few decision makers will ever read. Stay informed. Stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next one.